So is ION just about microgrids? So the big answer is no, it's not. But it's also a definitional thing, right? So we actually call what we're doing virtual microgrids. And so the reason we say that is the virtual microgrid is the fact that a microgrid has tended to be someone coming in and setting up, a bunch of solar panels here, and wires and poles, and bringing it together, or setting up a bunch of distributed energy resources in a certain place and enabling that to become then a microgrid. So a microgrid is a grid that can run and work together, but it's also connected to the macro grid, it's connected to the main grid. Whereas a mini grid is normally kind of off the main grid, it's out somewhere else in a rural area. And so ION technology doesn't just have to work in microgrids, it also works in mini grids, because it's essentially the same technology. All it is the ability to have a bunch of different devices with addresses, understanding each other and coordinating together. So that could happen in these mini grids out in the rural areas, but it can also happen. We see it mostly happening in the grid areas that are already connected to the main grid. The key bit of the main grid is it's outdated, and it's been made to transport electrons one way, not two ways. And that's been the major problem. So what the microgrid, why we call it a virtual microgrid, is we're not talking about someone has to start with a $1 million investment with loads of infrastructure that goes in. A virtual microgrid happens when a few people download the ION app, start to use the ION app, start to stake some ION tokens, download the app, maybe they have a couple of devices running in their system that are talking to other devices, and those devices start to coordinate together. Now that could be 3 different houses with smart plugs on their dryers talking to each other. That's essentially a virtual microgrid, because that grid is then working with each other to do it. Now, there's a few use cases that we've got that are happening that it has to stay really local. Yes, okay, it could be my street, and we have a battery at the end of the street. That's a virtual microgrid. Sometimes we just interact along our street with our battery. Sometimes we go out to the main grid. It just depends. And the system that we've built, and our CTO sim has simulated this, we put it together and we've been testing this, is it actually kind of expands and contracts around areas of pressure points in the grid. And that's why it's a virtual microgrid. It's not a static thing that sits there on 15 houses. It's actually something that grows organically, house by house, plug by plug. That's why Holochain is so important, because it's agent-centric. And then grows out, and then those things interact together. And like the swallows, what is it called? The name. All the swallows swarm together. It's like they move like that, and it moves around, and it interacts with each other. All those different devices interact with each other, and that's why it's not just a microgrid solution. There's lots of fantastic people doing great microgrid solutions. We're producing a solution here that is from the bottom up, from the device level upwards into the house, that enables in all those houses and commercial, industrial places as well to interact together and communicate and coordinate together. And that might get bigger and smaller depending on the need of the grid. So yeah, it's much bigger than just being a microgrid solution.
Okay, what I'm hearing from that is the way a microgrid might get thought of is effectively forced connections between devices, so the parameters and the bounds of the microgrid. Whereas what we're hearing with ION is actually you're giving the capacity for all of the devices to make peer-to-peer links between two-way peer-to-peer links between each other. So the actual picture of the grid is completely evolvable based on what links need to be created at any one time. So there's the overall capacity for communication, which grows exponentially as more devices are connected, but the actual grid itself is simply a representation of those recent communications.
That's exactly right. Perfectly described. Yeah, thank you.